be pleased to know that our first session is beginning now with Mississippi as an architectural trendsetter. You know, more and more people are coming to Mississippi to see what is here. And to help us understand what is here, Chase Klugh is the Director of Preservation of the Historic Natchez Foundation. He has a history degree and master's in historic preservation from the University of Georgia, and he's involved directly with tax credit projects, National Register nominations, and preservation consulting. Jennifer Baughn is an architectural historian with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Jennifer has conducted and managed surveys in historic buildings in over 800 schools around the state. In 2016, Baughn authored the National Historic Landmark nomination for Edgar and Merle Evers House in Jackson. She has a book being published this month called Buildings of Mississippi, a book in the Society of Architectural Historian Buildings of the United States series. Bill Gatlin is an architectural historian. He's worked for the Department of Archives and History and as the National Register Program Coordinator. He's reviewed and edited hundreds of nominations from consultants and individuals. Jeff Rosenberg, based in Biloxi. Jeff is on the Mississippi Gulf Coast National Heritage Area Preservation Coordinator with the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. He's a graduate of Belmont College at Roger Williams University School of Architecture. And he served as technical preservation specialist for the Department of Archives and History and oversaw the rehabilitation grants due to Hurricane Katrina's destruction. He has received the Mississippi Heritage Trustees Award for Outstanding Leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, with this panel, I now introduce Mississippi as an architectural trendsetter.
An ambitious 27-year-old Robert Edgar Bost, R.E., born September 29, 1863, arrived in Natchez, Mississippi in the latter half of 1890. A North Carolina native, R.E. found himself as supervisor of construction for the M.T. Lumen Construction Company building the Natchez Hotel. He likely considered the river town a stepping stone to future success. However, Bost immigrated to Natchez at the end of a 2 decades-long boom, one dominated by a commandeering merchant class. This unbridled energy, the byproduct of agriculturally linked economic success, coupled with an eventual marriage, provided reason enough for R.E. to stay put. Bost discovered a Natchez far different from the one before, during, and after the Civil War. As the once dominant Natchez planter class faded, a rising class of newcomers, a new kind of Southern businessmen, entered a new era. These merchant entrepreneurs established themselves as players in the new labor system of sharecropping, becoming the economic power brokers in the district. Bost not only served this group, but also joined it by the end of his career, a beneficiary of this 1870s, 1880s postbellum economic engine. R.E. landed on a wave of success, propelling Natchez into the 20th century. In a city barely eclipsing 12,000 residents, R.E. Bost produced and/or collaborated on a combination of approximately 60 residential and commercial projects. Bost's portfolio, spanning stylistically from Queen Anne to Craftsman, reflected his professional dexterity. A businessman at heart, Bost's entrepreneurial spirit proved successful in a transitioning Natchez. Today, the architectural imprints of R.E. remained ever present. Throughout his adolescent years, R.E. lived with the family of his uncle, R.A. Bost. In October 1880, a 17-year-old Bost left North Carolina for Gainesville, Florida. Lamenting his departure, the Newton Enterprise noted, quote, "Mr. Bost is a clever and deserving young man, and we are sorry to lose him," end quote. Pursuing a career in the construction industry, R.E. moved to Florida at the height of the American hotel craze. A decade-long stint, Bost began his professional career in Gainesville as a construction manager for various hotel building projects. During this 10-year span, he became employed by the M.T. Lumen Construction Company. Headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky, the firm completed large public projects across the South. As one of the top contracting firms in the country, the firm's unprecedented reach benefited up-and-coming professionals like Bost. This connection eventually transplanted him to Natchez. As Reconstruction ended and progressive ideals permeated recovering communities, Natchez experienced transformative shifts in its economy, labor force, and landscape. A combination of sharecropping and credit debt lending systems produced new wealth, precipitating the rise of the merchant class. Cotton remained the essential crop, and freedman and planter alike found themselves reliant on this new group of merchants. The profits from these mercantile businesses provided enough capital to expand into other entrepreneurial pursuits, expressing sentiments such as, quote, "We are all Yankees now," end quote. These businessmen created a system that built modern Natchez, a reflection of New South enterprise. When R.E. Bost arrived in 1890, the city of Natchez had added 3,000 new residents, a 43% increase from the previous decade. By the turn of the century, another 2,000 citizens bolstered the population to 12,210. This increase transformed the Natchez built environment. The Natchez Hotel, quote, without doubt, one of the finest and most complete hostelries in the South, stood as the architectural embodiment of this transition. Described as the German Renaissance style, construction on the Natchez Hotel began on August 28, 1890. As construction supervisor, Bost oversaw the project to its completion on September 22, 1891. The hotel, with its large arcaded stone entrance at the corner of Franklin and North Pearl Streets, included 52 private rooms, a spacious dining room, 3 parlors, and 2 bars, among other amenities. At a cost of $100,000, the prominent 4-story building, quote, stood as an enduring monument to the public spirit and enterprise of the men who furnished the means for its erection, end quote. These men had secured political, social, and economic power in Natchez and produced the city's finest post-war public building. This dynamic not only produced a transformative shift in the local built environment, but launched Bost's career. As mercantile revenues swelled, Natchez boundaries expanded. Available capital combined with access to cheap land and an increasing population necessitated the rise of suburban Natchez neighborhoods. From 1890 until 1936, R.E. Bost built and designed in and around these developing areas, actively transforming Natchez's post-war built environment. Of his 44 documented residential projects, Bost completed 22 in the Queen Anne style, symbolic of turn-of-the-century affinity for loosely interpreted 17th century English architecture. Queen Anne designs became the main residential style throughout the country. In 1882, the Natchez and Jackson Railroad completed lines in Natchez, connecting the city to Jackson and other southern states. This connection provided access to new markets, new industry, and new items. For RE, the railroad provided readily available prefabricated building materials and architectural pattern books, driving the popularity of Queen Anne style. Bost used these resources to build on speculation, purchasing land plats and constructing identical residences. Within the 600 block of State Street, Bost produced 5 carbon copy Queen Anne houses, surviving examples of his speculative practices. This entrepreneurialism and craftsmanship garnered Bost professional respect throughout Natchez. By 1898-1899, the number of building projects in Natchez gave rise to new architectural firms, including Bost and Chamberlain Architects. E.N. Chamberlain joined Bost as head architect, with R.E. acting as a general contractor. Although short-lived, the partnership produced several of Bost's most important residential projects. Throughout the summer months of 1898, R.E. completed his finest Queen Anne residence, the Charles B. Patterson House. Revenues from his Main Street staple and dry goods business allowed Charles Patterson to express his nouveau wealth. Located in another late 19th century suburban development just south of downtown, the residence typified the Natchez merchant experience. Features such as its octagonal tower with bell-shaped roof and finial, textured siding materials, and porch balustrade of spindles and panels exhibited a high degree of architectural finish. Interior finishes included elaborate millwork, brass lighting fixtures and hardware, and classic mantelpieces. The Patterson House remains as one of the most significant Queen Anne residences in Natchez. The morning of Tuesday, February 27, 1900, solidified R.E.'s life in Natchez. At 6:30 a.m., he wedded Natchez native Annie Davis, quote, a charming, cultivated young lady, possessed of the most amiable disposition, end quote. Throughout his career, Annie supported Ari as a partner in life and work. A gifted artist, Annie drafted many architectural projects while also photographing them at completion. As early as 1888, the colonial revival style invaded the Bluff City. A direct reference to English colonial models, the style grew in popularity with Natchezians due to close connections with classical architecture. Popularized by McKim, Mead, and White, colonial revival designs dominated the Natchez building world from 1905 to 1915. Although new construction accounted for the majority of colonial revival residences, a large number of Italianate and Queen Anne properties were redesigned in the style. Throughout the northern suburbs, the style rapidly outpaced the earlier Queen Anne form. Bost designed and constructed 12 colonial revival properties. Similar to previous projects, already built on speculation. In 1904, he completed 3 identical colonial revival residences on Washington Street. The 2-story frame houses exhibited reserved exterior detail, a departure from Bost's reliance on varying fenestration in his Queen Anne designs. However, RE did work with higher style colonial revival designs. Around 1905, Bost earned a contract to redesign an earlier cottage incorporating the existing residence. The home of yet another Natchez merchant, the request came from Louis Benoit. The French-descended businessman owned and operated the touted Benoit Clothing Company located on Main Street. As a successful and influential citizen, the haberdasher exemplified RE's clients. Denoted by Bost as a remodel, the finished project was essentially a contemporary colonial revival home. Bost incorporated the previous home as a rear wing, constructing the elaborate 2-story residence facing South Union Street. The completed Louis Benoit house is a large frame structure on a cement foundation with a hip-shaped roof and gabled bay projection. The northeastern corner sported an octagonal 2-story 3-stage tower with an OG roof, finished in pressed metal shingles. The entrance featured a pediment finished in stucco with high relief flower and scroll decoration supported by paired ionic columns. The first floor plan included a welcoming reception hall with dogleg stair, parlor, and library separated by sliding doors, and dining room. 4 bedrooms, a dressing room, and bathroom completed the second story. RE's use of formal clarity inside and out produced a typical colonial revival home. 1907 proved to be a transitional year for RE. In August, he relocated his North Commerce Street office to 115 South Commerce Street. In 1890 Queen Anne townhouse he named the Bost Office Building. This move prompted several forays into other business ventures. In late 1906, Bost became the president of Natchez Brick and Manufacturing Company, producing 40,000 brick per day. In 1907, he secured the agency of Rutgers Paint. The Bost office building also served as the location of a lime and cement company, a highly successful downtown business. In addition, RE served as a charter member of the Natchez Realty Company. A reflection of his speculative past, Bost played the dual role of seller and builder. This diversification in business owed much to RE's success as an architect and contractor, but signaled major changes for Natchez. The Natchez merchant class absorbed numerous economic setbacks between 1907 and 1910. Successive events of flooding and the introduction of the cotton-eating boll weevil ruined agricultural production along the Mississippi River. This downturn stalled merchant businesses, effectively halting decades-long growth. The city lost nearly 1,000 residents and revenues dwindled. A slight separation from this agriculturally linked success, coupled with a greater reliance on manufacturing, defined Natchez's approach to resolving this recession. This approach created a diversification, a practice Bost had been early to adopt. During his career, RE completed 17 documented commercial public projects. 10 of these jobs occurred from 1907 to 1916. A collection of manufacturing centers, philanthropically funded educational buildings, and religious structures, these projects mirrored the back end of sustained progress. As Natchez struggled, Bost excelled. Once exclusively employed by the merchant class, Bost leveraged his success and joined them. Capitalizing on his adaptability, Bost positioned himself for future accomplishments in residential contracting. Leading up to 1920, Natchez experienced a period of brief recovery, adding new citizens and homes. Although the Queen Anne and colonial revival styles exited with big capital, the bungalow and craftsman modes emerged. a replicable, family-centric style, the bungalow showed Bost's professional dexterity. RE again built on speculation, completing 2 sets of similar residences on South Union Street and Linton Avenue. In 1919, at the age of 56, Bost completed his most definitive bungalow property, the Harrison House. A 1-story frame cottage on New Street, the Harrison House stood as a sophisticated interpretation of the craftsman bungalow style. Constructed for the family of an African-American doctor, Robert W. Harrison, the home included a low-pitched cross-gable roof with wide overhang and bracketed eaves. The main entrance included a central doorway flanked by casement windows divided to read as side lights with a single light transom. Interior finishes included built-in furniture custom designed by Bost. A clear example of his renowned abilities, RE would end his career in this style, completing 8 craftsman bungalow residences. A year after completing the Harrison House, RE predicted another increase in residential building. In turn, he recruited Illinois architect C. Sedgwick Moss, forming Bost and Moss in November 1920. Another brief partnership, the firm produced only a handful of renovation and new construction projects over 5 years. By 1925, RE's work slowed dramatically. From 1925 to 1936, Bost worked primarily on renovation projects rather than new construction. Throughout this period and following the closure of his office, Bost maintained his businesses and participated in local government positions. Robert Edgar Bost died on Saturday, October 19, 1946, and was buried in the Natchez City Cemetery. Although perceived as being dominated by towering white columns and galleries from the past, the current Natchez built environment reflects successes of the New South era. Regarded as, quote, a very energetic contractor that does not permit the grass to flourish under his feet, end quote, RE Bost played a central role in this development. His 44 original projects assisted in reshaping Natchez as from an antebellum river port into a modern city. 3 current National Register districts include 469 contributing elements. 405 elements, or 86%, were completed between 1883 to 1925, and 207 were completed between 1883 to 1910. These numbers indicate the influence of the Natchez merchant class and the overall success of the city entering the 20th century. Today, RE Bost's tombstone epitaph reads, quote, "In my father's house are many mansions," end quote, a testament to the lasting impact of his architectural skill, dedication, and spirit. He remains as Natchez's most prolific turn-of-the-century architect and builder.
In his 2015 biography of English-born architect William Nichols, designer of state capitals in North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi, author Paul Kapp asserts that Nichols' domed Greek Revival's Mississippi capital, quote, captured the age of Jackson. In contrast, he dismisses Mississippi's new capital as, quote, a generic state capital, rather than one that represents the culture of Mississippi, end quote. Answering the generic part of this statement is the new capital's designation in 2017 as a National Historic Landmark for its nationally significant Beaux-Arts design. But I want to focus this paper on the second part of Kapp's comment, which places the new capital outside of Mississippi culture. It's true that the marble plaque listing all the artisans who built the building does underscore the impression that the new capital is a northern transplant. Designed by a German architect from St. Louis, built by a Chicago construction firm, clad in Indiana limestone, the building had only one Mississippi subcontractor, the plumber. But I maintain that Kapp's assessment is based on a misunderstanding of Mississippi culture at the beginning of the early 20th century as a closed, planter-dominated society, and ignores the reality that Mississippi had long and close ties to the Midwest via the Mississippi River and the Illinois Central Railroad. A closer look at the construction of the Capitol shows a complex story of the intertwining of Deep South and Midwest in progressive era Mississippi that benefited the state with a beautiful neoclassical building and influenced architectural design for decades. In 1900, Mississippi's new governor, Andrew Longino, convinced the legislature that it was past time to build a new capital. Nichols' old capital suffered from 60 years of unending non-maintenance, combined with a genuine structural flaw caused by the constant shifting of Jackson's notorious Yazoo clay, one of the most expansive and destructive soils on earth. The legislature created a State House Commission on February 12, 1900, with 5 members, including a county sheriff, a lawyer, a state senator, the attorney general, and Governor Longino. In other words, a group that might have been able to write laws, but as for overseeing a major construction project, possibly a recipe for disaster. The commission didn't waste time, eagerly meeting on March 17th and advertising in national newspapers for an architectural contest. Displaying an amazing naivete, the commission allowed architects a mere 3 weeks to appear in Jackson with plans and specifications in hand. The national journal Construction News scoffed that the commission, quote, is proceeding in a way that has every promise to assure the people of Mississippi an abomination that will violate all the canons of art and which promises to reek with building scandals, end quote. Nevertheless, 14 architects, none of them Mississippians, did appear on April 9th to present their ideas and drawings. And here's where the story could have gone bad in a stereotypically insular Mississippi way, a way that numerous contemporary state capitol projects took. But instead, this group of politicians and lawyers, after several weeks of deliberation, admitted that they needed, quote, the services of a competent person to advise them, end quote. Shockingly, instead of hiring a crony, they found a real expert unconnected with them or their political campaigns, or even to Mississippi. Capitol curator Brenda Davis calls it the best $490 ever spent in the state of Mississippi, and it brought engineer Bernard Green from Washington, D.C. to Jackson for 2 days to evaluate the 14 anonymous plans. Bernard Richardson Green had worked as a civilian for Colonel Thomas Casey of the Army Corps of Engineers since 1863, assisting in the construction of the Washington Monument and gaining national fame for completing the Library of Congress project after Casey's death in 1896. Green's insightful remarks about the Mississippi Capitol proposals gave valuable guidance to the State House Commission. In his report to the commission in 1900, Green laid out his philosophy of design, which required that a capitol should be massive and noble, and that the building should have, quote, quiet outlines in contrast to the pinnacles and rattling, unrestful skylines of some designs. Green cast his engineer's eye on anonymous plan number 5, the design of Theodore Link of St. Louis, focusing on the building's plan. He approved of placing the legislative halls on the same floor, yet, quote, well separated and in their own neighborhoods, as they should be, with the rotunda functioning as a natural center of departure for all parts of the building. Green suggested practical measures to make the building less costly and more functional. Eliminate the campanile, raise the center dome, add skylights for natural lighting of the corridors, and insert a porte cochere with a basement entrance. After Green's presentation, the State House Commission immediately sent a telegram to Theodore Link offering him the job, which he accepted on June 21st. Theodore Link, who spent his career in St. Louis and whose office collection was not archived, is not as well known as he deserves. Architectural historian Richard Coffin and St. Louis architect Gary Tetley have pieced together an impressive and diverse list of Link's projects, which range from the Richardsonian Romanesque St. Louis Union Station, a National Historic Landmark, to the Italian Renaissance-style Louisiana State University campus, to the classical revival Reed Hall at Washington and Lee University. Link was born in Wimpfen, Germany, and studied architecture and engineering in Paris. In 1869, he migrated to New York and moved to St. Louis in 1873. Link had about 8 draftsmen hard at work during the Mississippi Capitol project, in addition to his oldest son, Carl, who was the supervising architect in Jackson. Link became well-liked in Mississippi. Jackson newspapers described him as, quote, a most agreeable and affable gentleman, quick of perception, imbued with a keen business sagacity, open and frank in demeanor, always scrupulously dressed, compact of figure, a quick, active step, and almost invariably with a cigar between his fingers, end quote. In 1917, the Mississippi legislature brought him back to the state to save the derelict old Capitol, which he called an old and venerable friend. He later managed Mississippi's largest building program up to that time, involving at least 23 structures at college campuses and state hospitals. When Link died in 1923 while overseeing the construction of Louisiana State University, the Mississippi legislature passed a concurrent resolution expressing sorrow over the loss of, quote, a great architect, a great artist, a gentleman in the truest sense of the term, and a devoted and loyal friend. By August 21st, 1900, a mere 2 months after accepting the new Capitol job, Link, showing a refreshing lack of ego, had incorporated all of Bernard Greene's ideas into a revised design. And by October 22nd, the commission had approved the project to be advertised for bids in newspapers in 5 cities: St. Louis, New Orleans, Chicago, New York City, and Jackson. Bernard Greene had been right to focus on the floor plan in Link's design because after 120 years of use, the original floor plan is still almost entirely intact and functional. Unlike some other capitals, such as Arkansas, where grandiosity overtakes functionality, Link's plan makes the best of the minimalism forced on him by the $1 million budget. The compact but grand staircase, along with 2 original elevators, moved throngs of people with ease during the legislative session up and down and through the even grander rotunda. The elevators are just one of the many modern elements that are original features in this neoclassical building, including exposed light bulbs used functionally but ornamentally in every major space, and a complex skylighting system that provides natural light to the top 2 floors through stained glass panels and glass block floors. After bids came in too high, Link apparently replaced his original marble specifications with a variety of man-made art marble, or scagliola. This decorative interior finish clads a steel and concrete structure never seen in Mississippi before, but common in skyscrapers in St. Louis and Chicago. The Colombian floor system, patented by the Colombian Fireproofing Company of Pittsburgh, employed lightweight and fireproof concrete slabs, while lightweight terracotta by the Northwestern Terracotta Company of Chicago clads the dome. Chicago was the home base of the Wells brothers, whose low bid of $833,000 won them the contract in December 1900 out of 12 bidders, none of whom, again, were based in Mississippi. Unlike Link, the Wells brothers today don't even have a regional reputation, but it appears that their practice extended to Philadelphia in 1900, to New York City in 1910, and possibly to New Orleans, where they placed an unsuccessful bid in 1907 for the new federal courthouse. Even before the Wells brothers could fully mobilize, architect Link encountered a big Mississippi problem in the foundation he had designed, which had been based on standard 10-foot boring tests. But Jackson's notorious Yazoo clay proved more devious than even his German mind could imagine. When the contractors began digging in February 1901, they found, quote, to the great discomfiture of all concerned, an underlying stratum of marl and treacherous earth, highly susceptible to the influences of both moisture and drought, end quote. With reminders of the old Capitol's serious structural problems close at hand, the State House Commission decided to route part of the reserve fund to building a deeper foundation. Link's revised foundation may qualify as the deepest of all the state capitals, an astounding 25 feet deep and 17 feet wide. The added cost of this solidity was $38,000, but the new Capitol's foundation has barely moved and is a credit to Midwestern engineering and a wise decision of the Mississippi State House Commission. Almost before that decision had been made, on April 15, 1901, another clash of Midwestern and Southern cultures occurred when the unionized white Masons from Chicago discovered that they would be working with non-unionized Black Masons from Mississippi. The story, covered in national newspapers and trade journals, prefigures W.E.B. Du Bois's 1902 report, The Negro Artisan, in which he noted that unionized whites often used their bargaining power to exclude Black artisans from jobs. On Mississippi's new capital, however, contractor A.E. Wells refused to dismiss the Black Masons, and according to the Vicksburg Post, quote, quietly paid the 7 white Masons the wages due, and they left the grounds. The African-American editor of the Seattle Republican, Horace Caton, who had Mississippi connections through his wife, commented that throughout the South, quote, contracting and building, whether brick, wood, or iron, have been done for years by colored men, And this explains why only that class of colored men without money, means, or experience come north, the mechanic finding plenty of work to do in the South without ever having to be troubled with either union or unionism. But when they have ventured north, they find not only unionism to fight, but color prejudice as well, end quote. By the summer of 1902, the Wells brothers moved from the exterior to the interior, which is where the new Capitol really shows its true American Renaissance modernity. And that's partly due to another Midwesterner who was not quite a Midwesterner, Louis Malay. Louis Malay was born in New York, the grandson of famous French artist Frederick Malay, and attended the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. After settling in Chicago, he helped found the Art Institute of Chicago, and he came to specialize in stained glass in an intricate mosaic style. Today, he's probably most famous as Louis Sullivan's art glass master. His most celebrated work was the interior decoration of Sullivan's auditorium building, where he employed exposed light bulbs in a similar way to Mississippi's new Capitol, leading to speculation about whether he might have had more input into the Capitol's interior than just the stained glass. In the new Capitol, the sense of being in a theater is strongest on the top floor, the gallery level. Here you see the arches of the rotunda treated with exposed lighting, inviting citizens to view the goings-on of the political theater in the round. Malay's stained glass for the two minor domes in the new Capitol's House and Senate chambers rivals the scale of his work on the 40-foot Grand Army of the Republic dome in the Chicago Public Library, completed in 1897. Malay's other new Capitol stained glass includes the 3 grand staircase windows depicting Lady Mississippi, a Native American, and a pioneer, and geometric prairie-style windows, all totaling 88 windows, 101 dome panels, and 322 skylight panels. The new Capitol cornerstone was laid to great fanfare on June 3rd, 1903, Jefferson Davis's birthday. The inland architect singled out the 28-month project for its unusual efficiency. All may carry their heads in pleasant dignity, for without smirch, wire pulling, or jobbery of any kind, the construction of this beautiful building has been finished within contract time, without extras, and within the estimated sum of the accepted contract. Perhaps the new Capitol's most important contribution to the state was that it renewed Mississippi's long love affair with classicism after 20 years of wandering in the Victorian wilderness. Richard Cawthon has called the new Capitol's impact on public architecture in Mississippi immediate and profound, noting that the state's last Romanesque revival courthouse and the first of 33 early 20th century classical revival courthouses were built in the same year, 1902. City halls, schools, commercial buildings, and houses also quickly began sporting classical columns, Palladian windows, and other classical details instead of the jigsaw and Queen Anne ornament they had in the 1890s. Since then, I think it's fair to say that Mississippians have never again fallen out of love with columns and Palladian windows. In 1900, a commission of leading Mississippians had a vision to build a beautiful and sturdy new Capitol, and they had the wisdom to bring in the Midwestern experts who could design and build such a structure on a budget. They handed this building as a birthright to future Mississippians, and it remains today as representative of the best of Mississippi as it was in 1903. Thank you.
Action. Vicksburg, the Gibraltar of the Confederacy, occupied a strategic location on the Mississippi River. Located on a high bluff, Confederate batteries targeted boats attempting to pass Vicksburg. As a result, control of Vicksburg became a prime Union objective. Vicksburg is the key, said President Abraham Lincoln. The war can never be brought to a close until the key is in our pocket. Beginning in the fall of 1862, the Union Army of the Tennessee, under the command of General Ulysses S. Grant, would attempt to seize Vicksburg. Grant's initial efforts were abysmal failures. Grant finally decided on a plan to cross the Mississippi River south of Vicksburg and assault the city from the east. Between May 1st and May 19th, Grant's army and the Confederate forces, commanded by General John C. Pemberton, clashed 4 times before Pemberton's army retreated to a heavily fortified line that protected Vicksburg. Grant launched 2 unsuccessful frontal assaults on the entrenched Confederate positions before settling into a siege. Civilians and Confederate forces gradually depleted the stored food supplies, and by early July, Pemberton concluded his army could not hold out and surrendered effective July 4th, 1863. With the fall of Port Hudson, Louisiana on July 9th, the Union had free navigation of the Mississippi River. For the soldiers who served, the war was the defining event of their lives. From the most ancient times, humans have felt a universal need to commemorate the important events and places of their lives. The effort to memorialize these experiences has taken many forms, some in brick or stone, ink or paint, and many in song, legend, and lore. Pragmatic necessity gave rise to the most common mode of memorialization of Civil War veterans. Congress established national cemeteries, many located on or adjacent to the battlefields, and were intended not merely as places of interment, but as visual memorials to fallen heroes. To mark the centennial of the American Revolution in 1876, Congress funded monuments at 8 Revolutionary War battlefields, establishing a precedent for federal preservation of Civil War battlefields. Veterans associations conceived and organized support for establishing battlefield parks, and veterans would ultimately build and oversee the parks. In the 1890s, Congress was still dominated by Civil War veterans who introduced legislation creating parks and appropriating federal funds for land acquisition and operations. Commissions established by the veterans organizations guided the development of the battlefield parks. Between 1890 and 1894, parks were established at Chickamauga and Chattanooga, Antietam, Shiloh, and Gettysburg. These parks reflected the vision of the larger community of veterans. First, they wanted to memorialize their comrades who died in battle. They wanted future generations to see the places where the most important events in the lives of their generation took place. There was also a desire to provide a laboratory for the modern military to study the sites of actual battle. Finally, there was a conscious desire for national reconciliation, reflecting the efforts of Union and Confederate veterans to create parks and to make them more than monuments to sectional victory. Efforts to memorialize the Battle of Vicksburg coalesced in October 1895 when a group of veterans established the Vicksburg National Military Park Association. Legislation drafted by the Executive Committee, led by General Stephen D. Lee of Mississippi, passed Congress in February 1899, and President William McKinley signed the law. Congress authorized the Secretary of War to purchase 1,200 acres of land and to appoint a commission of 3 veterans to direct establishment of the park. Secretary of War Russell Alger appointed active members of the mission of the Vicksburg National Military Park Association, including Captain William T. Rigby of Iowa, Captain James Everett of Illinois, and General Stephen D. Lee of Mississippi. The commission completed a survey of park boundaries, a topographic survey, laid out and constructed 16.5 miles of roads. The commission prepared a detailed history of the battle and erected 400 cast iron tablets and markers. The legislation creating the parks left the responsibility for monumenting the parks to the states. Between 1903 and 1908, 7 states erected monuments in the park, and 7 more were in progress, including plans for the Illinois Memorial, calling for a state monument of enduring stone and bronze as a memorial to the Illinois soldiers and sailors. The site selected for the Illinois monument was on a small hill near the earthworks occupied by Illinois troops commanded by General John A. Logan, and from which they mounted an assault on a heavily fortified redan held by Louisiana troops. A design commission selected Chicago architect William LeBaron Jenny to design the monument. Trained in France, Jenny served in the Corps of Engineers during the war. Following the war, he settled in Chicago, where he pioneered the steel frame skyscraper. Jenny and the commission selected a circular temple form 55 feet in diameter with a hemispherical dome reaching 65 feet in height. The entrance was under a portico supported by 6 Roman Doric columns. The interior had 60 bronze panels carrying the names of every officer and enlisted man who served in the Illinois troops during the campaign. The floor was decorated with a mosaic of the state seal. The Illinois Memorial was completed ahead of schedule and under budget by the fall of 1906 at a total cost of $257,735. The monument was dedicated October 26, 1906. The Illinois Commission filed its final report in December 1906. The monument was located near the center of the Illinois lines where, quote, it commemorated the hardest of the struggle of the greatest number of Illinois troops. Three historic figures in the pediment. The central figure representing history, recording the deeds of the reclining figures, representing the North and South, reunited in peace. The large eagle testifies that the North and the South are again indissolubly reunited in peace and are beneath its aegis under the protective wings of our great nation. The monument, stark, sparkling in the sunlight, in all dignity and grandeur, sits against the blue, warm southern sky, the greatest soldier's memorial in the world. It honors and perpetuates not the power and pomp of kings, but the sovereignty of the highest type of American citizenship. Yeah, that's not right.
Many biographies of famed architect Louis Sullivan mention his Ocean Springs, Mississippi retreat, almost as a realm into which he vanishes, disappearing completely, ceasing to exist for a time, only to return to reality in Chicago with his tightly held beliefs renewed and further entrenched. Sullivan's first biographer, Hugh Morrison, in 1935, described Sullivan's Ocean Springs house as, quote, unquote, his most loved home. How did Sullivan, a man so closely associated with Chicago's urban verticality, come to love a horizontally oriented rural retreat on the Mississippi Gulf Coast? In the late 1880s, the Chicago architecture firm of Adler and Sullivan was one of the best known in North America for their innovative, uniquely American designs that were being applied to a new building form, the skyscraper. In December of 1889, firm partner Louis Sullivan sought a reprieve after nearly 4 years of nonstop work, which included one of their biggest projects to date, the Chicago Auditorium. On this trip, Sullivan was seeking warmer climates and traveled through the West and Southwest, but did not find the respite he was searching for. Ending up on his return trip to Chicago, Sullivan found himself in New Orleans. He did not care for the city, but while there, he ran into friends from Chicago, James and Helen Charnley. The Charnleys convinced him that a trip to the Mississippi Gulf Coast might give him the respite he was in search of. After 2 weeks on the coast and feeling better rested than in years, Sullivan and the Charnleys sought to purchase land for building vacation homes. They chose adjacent parcels of land near Ocean Springs on East Beach Drive. When Sullivan saw the rural, undeveloped land, he stated he knew exactly what he would do, planning for, quote, 2 shacks 300 feet apart, with stables far back. Also, a system of development requiring years for fulfillment, end quote. Sullivan did not use the term shacks in a derogatory sense, but rather to infer that the houses were to be private and personal in nature, not intended for entertaining or to impress the owner's lofty social status or wealth upon passersby. While Sullivan's known for uniquely ornamental building, these cottages, both by design and circumstances, were not. The development requiring years of fulfillment that Sullivan spoke of was that of his extensive rose gardens that he would plant on the properties. This is something that the Charnleys would not undertake to the same degree as Sullivan continuously designed and redesigned his garden for the 20 years that he owned the property. In March of 1890, construction of the houses were let to a local builder, and when Sullivan and the Charnleys returned the following February of 1891, the houses were complete. They were nearly identical, both horizontally oriented with hipped roofs. They had T-shaped floor plans and were clad on roof and walls with cypress shingles. Deep porches wrapped both houses. Presumably being taken with this design for their Ocean Springs house, the Charnleys would commission Adler and Sullivan to design a year-round home for them the following year on Chicago's Gold Coast. Today known as the Charnley-Persky House, it serves as the headquarters for the Society of Architectural Historians. Louis Sullivan must have thought rather highly of the vacation homes design, as in period publications on his work, he would include his homes, which stood in stark contrast to his vertically oriented office buildings shown in the same publications. Almost immediately after Sullivan's first inspirational visit to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, his style begins to crystallize. He would shed the influence of past architects. From now on, gone is the impact, or as he would describe it, the ghost of revolutionary architects such as H.H. Richardson, with Sullivan leaving what he would call his quote-unquote masonry period. Evidence of this, in the summer of 1890, in the witness of others, Sullivan would design the St. Louis Wainwright building in a near 3-minute fit he described as, quote, a sudden and volcanic, end quote, giving what was immediately recognizable as a new and appropriate form to the skyscraper. On the left of the screen, you can see the Wainwright building and compare it to some New York skyscrapers by big-name East Coast firms of the era. Sullivan's design is one that expresses the verticality of the building's form as opposed to the other skyscrapers up to that point that typically expressed a horizontal in orientation, giving the appearance of multiple buildings stacked on top of one another. The design also expressed honesty in the structure's form and materials. There would be no mistaking that the building was not supported by a slender steel frame when compared with the thick, heavy walls of a load-bearing masonry building, one that a load-bearing building requires. Trips to the coast for the Charnleys and Sullivan became customary occurrences as work would allow, specifically to escape the cold, snowy weather and the hard paved surfaces of Chicago, trading them for the comparatively warmer weather and greenery of the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Sullivan would rely on his property not only to recharge his energy, but also his inspiration levels. While he avoided doing design work at the house, he is documented as doing a considerable amount of writing while in Ocean Springs, frequently using his gardening and surrounding landscape as metaphors. Sullivan's motivation to write was the defense of his work, which after 1893 began to fall out of fashion when the Chicago World's Fair ushered into vogue the White City, white plaster staffed formed buildings of neoclassical and European influence, as seen on the right side of the screen. Sullivan's contribution to the fair was a polychromatic transportation building, seen on the left of the screen, with its avoidance of classical detailing, It really was the exception to the monotone pallor of the Grand Court with its acres of classically inspired buildings. In 1895, Sullivan and business partner Dankmar Adler dissolved their firm, leaving Sullivan with more time to spend in Ocean Springs and the greater need to defend his designs after the loss of any stability that the elder Adler may have provided Sullivan with. If Sullivan could not do it his way, he would not do it at all, regardless of the client or the commission. And this attitude would become worse than whatever outside force could do to his career. The combination of the dissolved firm and a recession in the mid-1890s left Sullivan on the defensive and provided him with plenty of time to write. Of Sullivan's written works, the best known is a 4-letter utterance published in March of 1896. Form ever follows function, Sullivan would say in his essay, The Tall Office Building Artistically Considered. He was questioning America's need for buildings that resemble Greek temples or medieval churches or other buildings out of antiquity. More commonly recalled today as form follows function, this is perhaps the furthest reaching seed that Sullivan germinated from his home and gardens in Ocean Springs. The Charnleys, with James suffering ill health, would sell the property to Fred and Elizabeth Norwood, also of Chicago, on June 1st of 1896. The Norwoods, like the Charnleys, had grown children and they were looking for a vacation retreat after Fred's retirement from the lumber firm of Norwood and Butterfield. Fred Norwood is often credited with introducing the double-band sawmill to Mississippi's yellow pine forest in the early 1890s and creating a commercial demand for the material in Chicago and other northern markets. This company was headquartered in Norfield, Mississippi, just south of Brookhaven, and the town's name is an amalgamation of the Norwood and Butterfield firm name. On the night of February 18th, 1897, while Elizabeth was staying at their Ocean Springs vacation home with her 2 daughters, the house caught fire. Fortuitously, Sullivan was in residence next door at the time and was able to help them escape safely and save a few possessions. However, the home burned completely. With his neighbors dehomed, Sullivan jumped at the chance to take another opportunity to redesign a building that he was intimately familiar with, having lived in a nearly identical structure for almost 7 years, but also really viewing this as an opportunity to do something over again with the knowledge gained. For more than 100 years, we would have been able to view both a pre-form follows function and a post-form follows function execution of the same building by Sullivan side by side on the beach in Ocean Springs. The horizontal form and T floor plan of the house, as it was reconstructed, is very similar to the building that burned. Still covered in shingles, however, the execution and the detailing of the house was further refined. The new house takes on a tripartite theme, a topic that Sullivan discussed in his essays, becoming 3 rooms wide. The house is 3 spaces deep, and doors and windows are ganged in groups of 3s. Bays were included in several rooms to increase the admission of light and ventilation, but also views from the interior. We know all too well it gets cold in South Mississippi occasionally, and the expansive views offered by the bays and gang doorways provide plenty of connection with nature while one can stay warm next to the fireplace. Fittingly, the interior wall is divided into 3, a wainscot, wall panel, and frieze. Sullivan abstained from using moldings. There's no baseboard or chair rail in the house to speak of. A simple picture rail and cornice serve their purpose, but otherwise are meant to be unobtrusive. The reconstruction cost $5,000 and was likely completed in the fall of 1897, as the builder signed his name on the tongue and groove wall boards he was installing on August 5th of that year. The interior of the entire house is finished in longleaf southern yellow pine. The wall panel tongue and groove boards were a different variant referred to as curly pine, exhibiting a rare growth pattern. Norwood presumably had access to the material through his lumber business, as it appears, to a much lesser extent, however, in his business partner's home in Brookhaven. In the first iteration, before the fire, the walls had been finished in a style that most Southern homes were built during this era, pine boards clad in gauze sheeting finished with a wallpaper. Sullivan would change this in the reconstruction, choosing the curly pine material with the idea of form following function. Rather than following the Victorian era trend of elaborate paint schemes or carved woodwork, decorative plaster, or bold wallpaper, Nearly nothing was done to this material, this curly pine, letting the natural grain of the wood stand out as the decoration. This also stood out sort of as the truth in materials rather than hiding the wood cladding behind wallpaper and attempt to describe it as a flat plaster. In his book, Kindergarten Chat, Sullivan staged a young architect's education as taking place through 4 outdoor scenes. These were summer, autumn, winter, and spring, the last of which he set in a, quote, beautiful spot in the woods on the shore of Biloxi Bay, end quote, the same setting of his own home. He wrote that his efforts are to work nature's subtle spell upon the reader. His own garden is the place where Sullivan reached epiphanies on nature's influence on architecture. After 15 years of perfecting the landscape, Sullivan was ready to share his very personal retreat with the world through an architectural record article. In the article, Sullivan was described as, quote, an ardent student and lover of nature, and the Ocean Springs property as, quote, an opportunity for constant observation, inspiration, and interpretation of natural phenomena to be duly assimilated and in time to appear in concrete forms of expression as fine art in buildings, highly conventionalized ornament, or as literary productions of exquisite worth, end quote. The article concludes by asking how one could ever leave this place knowing, quote, in full measure how much it has done for our art and go out again to where its influence has spread abroad. For from this little spot has emanated the results of reflection and communication with real things, which has produced an invaluable contribution to our American architecture, end quote. Well, these homes stood side by side until the destruction of Sullivan's home by Hurricane Katrina. Sullivan's comment in his autobiography, entitled Autobiography of an Idea, published shortly before his death in 1924, was that his house was destroyed by a hurricane in 1908, a statement long taken literally, yet it was no secret that the house still stood on the corner of Holcomb Boulevard and East Beach. And Sullivan even retained ownership of the house until 1910. Speaking symbolically, however, Sullivan was referring to the destruction of his household by his whirlwind marriage to wife Margaret in 1899, which had deteriorated to the point where when Margaret traveled alone to Ocean Springs in the spring of 1908, she would end up leaving through the port of New Orleans, getting on a ship to New York, where she would live the remaining majority of her life. Sullivan viewed this once pure wellspring of inspiration as tainted. A collection of lost pains prevented him from writing much in his autobiography about his designs in Ocean Springs. While he does go on in depth about his other life experience, however, he saves his highest praise for his time spent on the coast, describing it as the place where, quote, he underwent that morphosis, which is all there is of him, end quote, and noted that he would always return with clarity of vision to Chicago. When he was in Ocean Springs, he found the clarity and resoluteness from his surroundings that allowed him to produce some of his most notable work. Referring to himself in the third person, Sullivan wrote, quote, "'Twas here Lewis did his finest and purest thinking. 'Twas here he saw the flow of life, that all life became a flowing for him," end quote. His most loyal draftsman, George Elmsley, would later say that Sullivan creates designs by communicating with a problem, far away from paper and pencil. This is the method that he urged upon all his draftsmen. And it's clear that Sullivan was getting quite far away from his pencil and paper in Chicago and doing his finest and purest thinking in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a place that allowed him to give us our best work.
Hello, all. Hello, all. We're getting our video and audio going again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Chris, I can hear you.
My video is not working right. If you have questions, you can type those into the chat and we'll pass them along. Jeff, are you with us? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Jeff, could you say a few words about the role or lack of same with Frank Lloyd Wright and the Charlie Norwood House?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question, and one we always get, when we have folks come to tour the house. Wright was a draftsman at Adler and Sullivan. Him and Sullivan had a very close relationship. Wright would actually claim the house in one of his autobiographies. I think his first autobiography in 1930, where he claimed to have designed the house, Sullivan's house, and drawn a house for the Charnleys. That was in 1930, and conveniently for Wright, it was after Sullivan was dead, the Charnleys were dead, and the Norwoods were dead. So there was really no one to counteract that statement by Wright. But with Wright's ego, that's his way of showing praise. He thought that the house was very high quality design work, and he may have not claimed it if he didn't think it was such a nice house. Adler and Sullivan and Wright parted ways in 1893 after Wright got in trouble for designing his bootleg houses in Chicago. So 1893, Sullivan and Wright don't speak again for another almost 20, little over 20 years until 1914. So when the house burns and is reconstructed in 1897, what are the chances are that Sullivan's so mad at Wright that he fired him on the spot that he's going to pick up the telephone or send Wright a telegram and say, hey, come back down to Ocean Springs and let's work on this. But, the house, it has a lot of the same features as the building that burned before. And, Wright may have just never known. If you hadn't seen a dear friend of yours in 20 years, and you're catching up, would you remember to mention something that the, project we worked on together, well, it burned and I worked on reconstructing it. So, we don't know. Wright never visited the house, so there was no way of him being able to tell whether or not it had changed after the fire.
And it's possible to see the house now.
Yes, absolutely. If anyone is interested, please send me an email. We do tours by appointment. I really appreciate being invited to present here, because this is a lot of the information today is stuff that's focuses on Sullivan's house. So there's a lot more information, specifically when we do tours about the Charnley house that wasn't covered today. So if y'all are ever down on the coast, drop me an email and we can set you up with a tour.
Yeah, that's right. Mr. Charles Clark, you had raised a hand here earlier. Did you have a question? All right. Bill Gatlin, are you with us?
I am.
Brother Gatlin, did I hear you say that the Illinois Monument was the world's finest monument to soldiers?
What I said was the Illinois commission that designed it said it was the finest monument in the world to soldiers.
And would you have any reason to disagree with that sentiment?
I certainly think it's a remarkably for the Civil War battlefield monuments. It certainly is a high level of detail. One of the few that certainly has an inside to go visit.
Yeah, it's certainly featured prominently and celebrated.
Yes.
Chase Klugh, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So let me transition that sentiment to you. Are those more modest houses in Natchez celebrated in the same way that some of the grander houses are? What is the local feeling about them, architectural significance or not?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because of course historic house museums and tour homes, of course, they get celebrated and showed off more. And then a lot of these homes that Bost built, those are still houses that people are living in and are getting sold, and people are buying them and selling them. And maybe it's where you grew up or where your friend, that was their house. So yeah, they're still being used in the same way that they were intended, and of course that's different than something like Stanton Hall or Rosalie or Magnolia Hall or those type of homes. So,
And have they been maintained in the same families at all?
to an extent, I think some of them have, but most of them, yeah, it's just it's sort of the landscape that you see in Natchez now is more dominated by that era of building. So that's kind of the landscape that we have, and of course, Natchez is unique for what it still maintains from pre-Civil War buildings, for sure. But the suburbs of the city and sort of the residential areas were really sort of dominated by Bost and other architects during that time period. And he just worked in and around those areas quite a lot. So,
Yeah. Jennifer Baughn, can you hear us?
I think she needs to unmute.
Jennifer, are you muted?
Not now.
Not now. Hearing about the extraordinary measures taken in the foundation of the state capitol, it is hard not to think about the current water crisis going on in Jackson due to the same Yazoo clay that is so pernicious. Were other state buildings given the same sort of stable footing, or?
I not to that level, certainly, but we've worked with schools and other public buildings around Jackson. I remember a great meeting we had with the school district about 20 years ago. And we were talking about 1950s schools that were steel framed and, worked on by engineers who were aware of the Yazoo clay. It's not a new problem, as you know. And one of the public works people said, well, now we know how to deal with the Yazoo clay like they didn't know back then. And I thought, well, maybe. Talk to me in 50, talk to me in 50 years. We'll see. It's just a dangerous and hazardous soil material. And I think the best way to deal with it, unfortunately, is to dig it up and put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, every engineer in Jackson is aware of the problem and has tried to, with varying success, to handle it. And
I think that we certainly have one of the prettiest state capitals. It's easy to sort of see the form of it, which is harmonious and balanced, and to admire the rich patterns in all of the different kinds of stone and man-made stone. But in some ways, the most interesting part of it, to me anyway, is the use of light, the electric lighting, but as well the skylights, which really provide a lovely effect in parts of the building that not everyone may have been to.
And I think that's a lot of Bernard Green's influence, the engineer who worked on the Library of Congress. And if you go to Library of Congress, you'll see very similar, not necessarily the exposed light bulbs, but the skylights. But he was the one that recommended that a skylighting system be brought in to bring in that natural light. So yeah, it's really a beautiful interior. I think I've been to many state capitals, and ours is worthy of the name of National Historic Landmark.
We have a comment from KPPOOL, and I would be willing to bet any amount of money that that's Kenneth Papool. And he notes that in spite of the extreme measures taken to protect the Capitol in 1901 with substantial foundations, the Yazoo clay still did significant damage to the building, necessitating a major rehab of the building by the 1970s. Yeah, there's no long-term win, it seems like, against Yazoo clay. These are all great. I think we have come up against the end of our time for this session. Marshall Bennett, can we hand it back over to you to direct folks as to what's coming up?
Yes, you can. We are very pleased with this session and thank all of the presenters for preparing this and letting us share your thoughts with us. And we will end this session and we'll start back at 12:15 with the Book of the Year winner, and Dr. Chuck Westmoreland will be here along with our speaker, Nancy Bristow. So you'll have to log back in on the Zoom to get into that session, but it's going to be a good one. So thank you all very much.